There is a letter. It is written in Italian, drafted by a man who had assessed his audience with the precision of a surveyor and decided that the document was too important to be left in his own hand. His natural script ran right to left across the page, a mirror habit, legible to no one but himself. For a letter addressed to the most powerful man in Milan, that would not do. So he had it transcribed by a professional scribe, left to right, in a clean formal hand that a duke's secretary could read without difficulty. The choice is worth holding for a moment. Even the handwriting was calculated. The letter was addressed to Ludovico Sforza, the man who controlled Milan. And this is where the document becomes strange, because the man who composed it was Leonardo da Vinci, and what Leonardo da Vinci wrote to Ludovico Sforza was not. "I am the finest painter in Italy." It was not. "I have studied light in ways no one has studied it before." It was not. "I can give your court an image of such beauty that the memory of it will outlast us both." What he wrote across 10 carefully ordered points was this: "I know how to build portable bridges. I know how to drain moats during a siege. I know how to construct siege machines, armored vehicles, artillery, and naval vessels equipped for attack. I know how to make catapults and devices for hurling fire. In each of these things, I believe I am not the equal of anyone now living." The painter appears in the final lines, almost as an afterthought. Welcome to Portraits of the Past, where we explore the lives of those whose legacies continue to echo through time. Leonardo di Ser Piero da Vinci was born on the 15th of April 1452 in the small Tuscan hill town of Vinci, outside Florence. His grandfather Antonio recorded the birth in his diary, the date, the hour, the priest who performed the baptism, in the neutral, administrative hand of a man setting down a fact. The note does not dwell on the circumstances. It does not need to. What the Florentine catasto, the official tax records of the city, would later make plain is that Leonardo was registered as an illegitimate dependent, the son of Ser Piero, a notary of standing, and a woman named Caterina, to whom he was not married. That entry in a government ledger carried more weight than any diary note. In the precise bureaucratic language of Renaissance Florence, it defined what certain doors would remain closed. The profession of notary, his father's profession and his grandfather's before him, was governed by guild statute. Illegitimacy barred membership. Certain civic offices were similarly foreclosed. These were not catastrophes. Leonardo was acknowledged by his father, raised in the family household, given his father's name. But the specific documented paths through which a talented man of his background might otherwise have moved were narrowed without his consent and without remedy by what the tax record said. It was not a story of suffering. It was a structural condition, and it shaped, with the quiet inevitability of such things, the calculations he later made about where a man in his position could go. He entered the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio in the late 1460s. The precise year is undocumented, and modern scholarship places the entry later than older accounts suggested, likely after his father formally established himself in Florence. The bottega was not a school in the modern sense. It was a working commercial studio, a factory in the bluntest honest language for the cultural consumption of the Medici elite. Painters, sculptors, and goldsmiths operating under the master's name, producing on commission the objects a prosperous city required: altarpiece panels, bronze reliefs, portrait busts, decorative objects for households of means. Apprentices contributed to works sold as verrocchios. That was the arrangement, and everyone understood it. The studio smelled of egg yolk binder and ground lapis lazuli, of the chalk dust that rose from prepared panels, of the sharp metallic tang of bronze being cast in the yard beyond. Light came through high windows and fell across work surfaces holding, at any given moment, the half-formed faces of saints, the unfinished drapery of angels, the careful armature of a sculpture not yet whole. Leonardo worked in that environment for the better part of a decade. Giorgio Vasari, writing his Lives of the Artists decades after Leonardo's death, includes the story of Verrocchio laying down his brush upon seeing his young apprentice's contribution to the baptism of Christ, overwhelmed, according to Vasari, by the superiority of the student's work, and resolved never to paint again. It is a satisfying story. It is not corroborated by any contemporary source. Vasari was a gifted biographer and an unreliable one, and the distance between the events he described and the moment he described them should be held in mind wherever he appears. What is documented is the baptism of Christ itself. Leonardo's hand is visible in it. The angel at the left edge of the panel, executed in a technique and with a quality that reads differently from the surrounding work. Whether Verrocchio wept or resolved anything, the record does not confirm. By the early 1480s, Leonardo had commissions of his own. The Adoration of the Magi, an altarpiece commissioned by the monks of San Donato a Scopito, was begun around 1481. It was not finished. He left it incomplete when he left Florence, the figures sketched in brown underpaint across a panel that still shows the geometry of a composition that was, in its ambition, extraordinary, and in its completion, abandoned. It hangs now in the Uffizi in that condition, unfinished, a document of the particular distance between what Leonardo began and what he brought to conclusion. That distance will recur. It is one of the things this story is about. He left Florence sometime around 1482. The precise circumstances are not fully documented. There is no record of disgrace or rupture. What there is instead is the letter, composed with extraordinary care for the specific needs of the man who ruled Milan, and written by someone who had thought carefully and without sentiment about what he was offering and why. Ludovico Sforza was not, in 1482, the Duke of Milan. He was its regent, ruling in place of his young nephew, Gian Galeazzo Sforza, in circumstances that were legally ambiguous and politically fragile. He had not inherited power cleanly. He held it by a combination of force and calculation, and he understood, as men in his position understand, that military capability and cultural prestige were not luxuries. They were instruments. The court he was building in Milan was not merely decoration. It was a claim to legitimacy made in bronze and stone, and the reflected distinction of the men he could attract to it. Leonardo understood this. The letter is evidence that he understood it with unusual precision. The 10 points read like a briefing prepared by a man who had done his research. Portable bridges, light enough to pursue an enemy and strong enough to bear the weight of an army. Methods for draining the moats of besieged fortresses, siege engines, artillery, armored vehicles. Enclosed, he writes, capable of penetrating enemy lines, naval vessels for attack, catapults, devices for hurling fire. Military engineers were not rare. Portable bridge designs were known. The novelty was not in any single item on the list. It was in the man presenting the list. The particular combination of technical breadth, visual intelligence, and a habit of mind that moved between disciplines, not because it lacked focus, but because it had identified in the connections between things a kind of understanding that specialization cannot reach. The letter was a pitch, a skilled one, written in a legible hand expressly so that it could be read. And Leonardo knew exactly what pitch to make. Then, in the final lines, he can also paint, he can sculpt, and if it pleases the Lord, he would be glad to undertake the bronze equestrian monument to Sforza's father, Francesco, a work that would honor the dynasty's founding figure and stand as a permanent statement of Sforza legitimacy. The painter, in the final lines. The patronage began. How the letter was received, or whether it was delivered directly or through an intermediary, is not fully documented. What is established is that Leonardo came to Milan, that Ludovico received him, and that a relationship formed which would last nearly 2 decades. He was 30 years old. He rode north with a letter that promised weapons of war and notebooks already filling with questions about the flight of birds, about the mechanics of water, about the precise way light describes a curved surface, about the interior structure of things not yet opened. The investigations that would eventually fill thousands of pages were already in motion, running alongside the commissions, alongside the engineering proposals, alongside the performances of court spectacle that his new patron would require of him. He was not the Leonardo the museums would later construct. He was something the Renaissance had not yet built a category for, something that the letter, with its weapons before its paintings, its siege engines before its saints, begins, if you read it carefully, to describe. The notebooks he carried north would spend the next 2 decades filling with evidence of what that category was. The weapons never materialized, something else did. And what it was and what it cost belongs to the chapters that follow. The paint is dry on this chapter, but the archives are vast. Subscribe and return to portraits of the past. The next exhibit awaits.